guys, I am Michaela Dice. I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us here on my podcast, Because You Belong Here. The purpose of this podcast is to talk about testimonies. I am a firm believer that your testimony should be someone else's prophecy. So we will be talking with some of my friends and family and people that I love about things that God has done in their lives, and I will be sharing different things about things that God has spoken to my heart and things that I've experienced through Him and His Word. And so I just wanted to tell you, grab a cup of coffee, pull up a chair, and come hang out with us as we go deep, discovering the ways that God has proven His love in tangible ways. I am so excited you're here. Hey everybody, it's Michaela. I am here with my new friend, Katie Brown. And Katie is on Instagram talking all things travel. But today we are here to talk about adoption and, just the Lord's goodness. So Katie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Ricardo. Well, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited you DM'd me. I used to talk about adoption all the time on my Instagram, and then it's just kind of like shifted into my business. But when I mentioned it the other day, I feel like I had so many people reach out like, oh, we're adopted too. We're adopted too. Or we have adopted too. So we adopted mamas. We find each other, right? We find each other. So I'm Katie. I am a mom of Theo, who is 4, through domestic private adoption. We live right outside of Atlanta. I'm a travel agent. I love Diet Coke, probably a little too much. And when I'm not planning people's travel, I'm probably watching Law and Order SVU, if I'm honest. I've seen them all, but I keep rewatching. It's just I'm addicted.
It's good stuff. I like it. So you said Theo is 4.
Theo is 4.
So how did you guys come to the decision for adoption?
So Garrett is my husband. Garrett and I had always kind of talked about adoption being probably the way we wanted to grow our family. And we might have been a little bit different in a way of, we don't know if we can have biological children. We've never tried. I just always felt really called to adoption. And my dad says that I used to be like, I'm going to adopt 10 babies when I grow up. And now I'm like, one's probably all we're going to have. But so it's always been something we've talked about. And we even talked about that we wanted to adopt first. That way, if we did have biological children, that we could always tell like our adopted child, like, you weren't like a last choice, you were a first choice. And not that it changes anyone's family dynamic, how they do it. That's just always kind of what we had thought about. But when we came into the adoption, it probably wasn't at the healthiest state of our life. My mom had just had pancreatic cancer and had passed away really suddenly. Like 6 months between diagnosis and passing away. And when you go through something like that, and I'm the only daughter, and I was literally, my mom was, in hospice, and I was like, Garrett, let's get pregnant right now so that she could be a part of this. Right. Yeah. And which I'm so glad he was like, babe, this is not, let's just take a minute. Cause I was just so desperate for her to be a part of any kind of, my children in my life, cause I knew she wouldn't be. So I think in that season, we were just wanting something joyful to celebrate. And so we probably, say if my mom had been completely healthy, I don't know if we would have started the adoption process immediately, but in that season, we just wanted something joyful. And so we were like, let's do this. Let's start the adoption process. Oh, and I always laugh the way that the Lord loves to do this and teach us more about His character in this process, because our adoption process was like anything but joyful. So we learned so much about the Lord in that season, but it was right after my mom had passed away. We were like, let's just jump in and do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to I was like, I can go into the sad parts
of me. My next question was like, what did that next step look for you?
Well, so we were, just, single, not single, no children, married. Right. So, and I really love to get things done. So for me, that was my job. I had another job, but that was my job to figure out what agency we wanted to look at. We actually were looking at foster care first. That's still very much on our hearts, but after having conversations with some social workers. I was like, Garrett, I don't know if this is the right season for right now, because we know what our ultimate goal is to have a child permanently in our home. And I know that's not the ultimate goal of foster care. And I don't want to have this child in my home and the whole time be like praying that something goes wrong with their case so that we get to keep
Right.
them. Right. That's not the heart of foster care. So we pivoted to private domestic adoption. And I was like, we're going to find our agency. We're going to get this home study done. I mean, I was all over it like white on rice. Like I was figuring it out. I was staying up late working on all the paperwork. I mean, we just jumped in head first. And by we, I mean me. And my husband was like, yes, do it, babe. I support you.
That's how it was for us too. My husband was like, I mean, I don't really want to do this right now. And then it was like, I prayed about it finally, and he came to me and was like, okay, I think I'm ready to move
Yeah.
in this process. And then it was like, okay, I got it. Like, I'll let you know where I need you.
Yeah, I was literally like, okay, I need you to do your section of the book, right? Because we have to do like a profile book or whatever.
Mhm.
And I was like, I've done mine 2 weeks ago. I need you to go and get it done. You have until Friday to get this done. Like,
Yeah.
I've done it all, make it happen. So I really jumped in head first, probably not doing the amount of research I needed to like properly prepare my heart for what was to come. But I think that's okay. I think you're need to be a little naive of some things to
Mhm.
make the process easier.
Yeah, like moving into adoption is such a weird thing because you have all these like hopes and dreams and like all these joys that you're thinking about. And if you do too much research, you're probably gonna like set
Right. Get
something
scared
up.
away. Get scared away. Yeah.
Yeah,
So we
that's
did, I just was like, let's do it. Let's go.
yeah, I love it. So in the state of Georgia, that's where you lived whenever you got.
Yes. Mhm.
So do you have to take classes to move forward with adoption or only in foster care? Like what did that
Only
process?
in foster care. Yeah. So only through foster care you have to do the classes. With the domestic, I mean, you find your agency or your consultant or whatever. There's lots of different ways that people choose to do it. But you have to get your home study done. I mean, similar, I would imagine, to what
Mhm.
the foster care. We actually had our first home study done for foster care. And then that was when we spoke with the social worker. So I kind of had an idea of what the home study process looked like a little bit because we'd done like a mini one, you know? So it's really getting like your home study. So all the background checks, all the fingerprints, all the
Right.
things. And then really a lot of it is working with your adoption agency through kind of what their steps are
Okay.
with creating your profile book. And you have this really long kind of scary list they send you of, okay, are you willing? Would you be willing to like see a profile of a child that has been exposed in utero to,
Mhm.
and all the different things? Would you be willing to see a profile of a child who has X, Y, and Z disabilities, is a product of rape, is a product of incest, is a product of, and you sit there. It's so bizarre. Like we just didn't tick anything because Garrett and I were like, if it was our biological child, I wouldn't know what was
Right.
going to happen when they came out. So I was like, let's just see what the Lord has for us. But I mean, you have to go through and look at really hard life scenarios and decide, are we willing to step into this messy? And I was just, I think, dumb enough that I was like, I am ready for all the messy. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That process, I feel like, makes you question everything you've ever thought you knew about yourself.
Yes, it does. And it also makes you kind of feel like a horrible person if you say, I'm not sure I am ready for X, Y, and Z. Like it makes you really question, and it makes you really push back with your marriage too. Like a lot of our conversations that we had, like maybe Garrett would say, no, I don't think I'm ready. I'm ready for that. And I would be like, what do you mean? Like, what if they came out of me with X, Y, and Z? And he was like, well, but that's different. Like, we're not choosing that. So it really gives a lot of great conversations. But I really would encourage, if you're going to start or start adoption, to also start counseling for a season, like marriage counseling.
Absolutely. Hmm.
There's just conversations you would never have in a different way of growing your family that you do in adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. My husband and I just were talking about this last night about some of the things we've gotten some diagnoses and different things just in the last 2 weeks that finally have given some context to some of the things
Yeah.
we dealt with some of our children. And we were talking last night about like maybe we just need a therapist, like because we've done it before. And I mean, we've been married 14 and a half years and like we've been through so much. But
Hmm.
like it does get to a point where you're like, okay, we need to figure out how to heal through this so that we can give them everything they need as they're dealing with and like navigating because we're not the
Yeah.
only ones navigating this, like, and I told him, I said, we're not the victims. Like, we made the choice to say yes to this.
Hmm.
Our other children didn't make that choice. And he didn't make that choice. This isn't something that is like, oh, yeah, he chose to
Yeah.
deal with all these things. It's, we as parents, we have to come into, like you said, like, come into this with like healed places that you don't know you have wounds until they're
Hmm.
there. And it's like, oh, this is like way harder than I thought.
And I think especially like my husband would say this if he's sitting next to me right now. Like we go to marriage counseling together right now because there was a lot of things that we didn't, I mean, heal from. Like I said, we jumped in right after my mom died. Like that was not,
Yeah.
maybe wise. And I think a lot of people come into adoption, like specifically, I feel like domestic, like private adoption, out of a place of like not being able to get pregnant naturally
Right.
on their own. And I think there's a lot of things to heal from that before you jump in
Absolutely.
to adoption because there's a lot of sadness that comes with that, I would imagine. And so I feel like we always laugh. We say we're saving up for our son's therapy fund and not for his college fund because we're like, we know we're going to mess him up. Like we know we're going to do
Right.
something because we're not perfect. And so I want him to see that now so that if he ever needs to do that, he's like, Mom and Dad did that. That's chill. That's okay. We called
Right.
our brain doctors, just like he goes to the
Love it.
doctor to like get a checkup. We're like, this is our brain doctor, and it helps us figure out how our brain works better and
Yeah,
how we
that's
can be a better mommy and daddy.
yeah. Yeah, that's what we've done. We've had a family therapist where we will all go in together
Mm,
and we will all sit together and we'll talk through things and then we'll have appointments for if one of the kids is struggling more, like they'll go in with other
yeah.
kids or I'll go in by myself and like we just kind of flex it out and it's like this just makes sense. And
Yeah, that's awesome.
my degree is in counseling psychology.
Okay.
And so my husband, who is very much like a 6 on the Enneagram, very introverted, like not a feelings kind of person, he laughs because it's like, well, you married a counselor, so here we
We're going to
are.
talk all about
We're gonna
it.
talk
Yeah.
about all about the everything. And
I
so
love
working through
that.
some of that with the kids, like we are going to learn how to like be healthy in how we talk about our feelings.
Yeah.
Because especially with adoption, like as they get older, and our oldest is 12, and I mean there are lots of questions and lots of things, and there's so many considerations that have to be made for each individual person,
Yeah.
you know? So on that note, have you, I mean, I would assume he knows he's adopted, right? Like
Oh,
on our
yes.
conversations.
Very
Has
much
that just
so.
always been part of the conversation, or did you like tell him at some point?
No, it's always been part of the conversation because to me, I was like, I don't want that to ever be a surprise or a shock. And so he has always known he's adopted. I mean, he knows his birth mom, he knows who she is. He knows, like, we have a picture of her, like when he was born, that he can look at when he wants to. I mean, right now, there's not a ton of questions, if I'm honest. I mean, he's 4. So, like, we just kind of take it as it comes. But yes, he totally knows. He thinks so. I think we'll talk about this later, but like one of the best things I think that's come through the adoption process is the community that I found through it. But I'm part of an adoptive moms group, and we did a family day where we had like a bounce house or whatever, and they all jumped. And after Cinco de Mayo, the Mexican restaurant down the street from us had a bounce house, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, they're all adopted,"
Oh, that's so
because
sweet.
he thought everyone that had a bounce house was adopted. And I was like,
I love
no,
that.
nobody. It's just Cinco de Mayo. So, yes, it
Yeah.
is very much, I mean, as much as a conversation can be. And it's a little bit weird because he looks like me. Like, we would never have to tell anyone that
Hmm.
he was adopted if we didn't want to. And so we walk that line pretty fine of like, we'll go out in public and, we'll be at Kroger or whatever, and they'll say, oh my gosh, she's your twin. And now I've just started to be like, thank you so much. Cause I don't want to have it be like a constant part of the conversation of him being
Mhm.
adopted.
Yeah.
That he was adopted.
Yeah. We always talk about how I feel like, because all three of our adopted children look like us too, like in
Uh-huh.
ways. And we always talk about how I feel like that's sometimes the Lord's way of just like confirming that you did the right thing and thanking you for being obedient. Like,
Uh-huh.
like it's just like this sweet little kiss from God, is what my friend calls them, like little kiss on the
Oh,
neck. Yeah, I love that. Okay, so what did your home study process look like?
I mean, I really think our home study was probably the easiest part, if I'm honest. But again, it's because I think it's also really different the season of life you're in. If we'd had other children already in the home, I think
Yeah.
and might have been different. But because it was just the two of us, and we just had 9 to 5 jobs that we could, and we're both pretty flexible. At the time, I worked at a church. I was a children's pastor, and my husband worked from home, and so it was pretty flexible. So we just had to find the right. We had friends that had gone through adoption process. We asked them, hey, who did you use for your home study?
Mm-hmm.
And they came and did it. And it was just a little weird because the end of our adoption process was during COVID. So we started in actually February of 2020 at the beginning. So we had our first home study like totally in person. And then the rest of them had to be virtual because COVID. So it looks probably a lot different now than it did in our season of adoption.
Yeah.
But
And
like, I think people get freaked out, like, oh my gosh, my house has to look perfect or be beautiful or whatever. No, girl, they're looking to make sure you have like that your house is safe. You have to have what's that thing called? A fire extinguisher, which I
that's
didn't
what I
have.
was
Yeah, I mean, which I guess is good to have. That was one that I
right.
was like, we don't have that. But I mean, I really feel like that was the weirdest part of the home study process that I think people aren't prepared for. And maybe, I don't know if it's this way in foster care, were like the questions that we were asked and like really deep personal questions. Like, I mean, they were like, so your mom just died. Are you doing this to like fill the hole that your mother has left? And I was like, no. I mean,
No.
that's not going to bring her back, like,
Right.
and so things like that, again, where therapy, I think, is good to go in there beforehand, to being super self aware because your life is on display for these people to pick apart
Right.
as they wish. So that
Yeah.
was honestly the more difficult part were some of the questions. The house, if you have a standard apartment, home, house, you'll pass as long as your house is safe and you follow their directions.
Right. That
Yeah.
was one of the things, the fire extinguisher. My husband tells everyone, like, that was the weirdest thing. They made us
Yeah.
like we had to go get a fire extinguisher before she came back for our next interview.
They sell them on Amazon. I know that now. I didn't know it
Oh,
at the
yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. Ours was he was born in 2012. So it was like the end of 2012 whenever we did our first home study.
Hmm.
And so he went and like we have like this little bitty one that I
Yeah, we
think
do too. I don't know if they like expire,
expired.
but we have the same one just
Probably
sitting in
should
there.
find out.
Yeah.
But then like the questions where they're like, okay, if something happens to you, who is going to take care of these children?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
it just like shines this light on all of the things.
And again, things with your marriage that I was like, I want them to take care of them. And like, I want them to take care of them, like where you have to have these conversations that I feel like if you are birthing a child, you probably don't have to have until you make your will,
Right.
right? Then you have,
Mhm.
so it just shines a light on so many things that you probably are not ready to shine a light
Right.
on yet.
Yeah. And it's so funny that you say that too, because our fourth one, we did IVF. So
Okay.
I gave birth to her in the hospital. And then when it was time to go, my husband was like,
That's it.
they're just sending us home. Like they didn't
Yeah.
check our car seat. Like, how do they know we can do this? This is so
Truly.
weird. After for all three of our older children, someone had to tell us that we were fit to be parents, and they're just letting us take this tiny person to our house.
I mean, we had to sleep in the hospital. I don't know if this is a NICU thing because we can talk about this. Theo's in the NICU, but like we had to like sleep in the NICU on the last night to like make sure that we knew how to like change his diaper and like watch a video about like emergency protocols. And I was like, would they have done this if if I had birthed him. I don't think they would have. I think it was
Yeah.
because we were adopting. And I was like, this is so odd. Like none of my friends who were all having babies at the exact same time as I was, like,
Right?
or as I was adopting, I was like, did you have to watch a video? And they were like, no, we just left. I was like, people have the babies in their home and they don't even have to. Anyway,
Right.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
wild.
It's so funny to just think about like all of those weird little things
Yeah.
that are like, how does this
Is
still
that normal? Yeah.
right? How did they know that everything's
Yeah.
fine? So funny. Okay. So in Georgia, do you have to have an agency? Is that what you said?
No, you don't. So you can have an agency, you can have a consultant. A lot of our friends used like a social worker that was connected with attorneys. We went through an agency though.
Okay. Yeah. Every state is so different. I always like to
Hmm.
ask people because, like, in Alabama, we didn't have to have an agency,
Yeah.
and our adoption ended up being like maybe $4,500 total because of that. Like, our one domestic infant adoption, I think we spent between home study and attorney fees and everything, it was like right around like 4,500. Whereas
I'm
all
so
the other
happy for
friends,
you.
right? Like, we have some friends here that she was on the podcast before. Her name is Joy. They have three, and each of theirs was like 45 to 50,000.
Yeah.
And they were like back to back because
Yeah.
they were biological siblings. And so it was like, it was a lot.
So if something were to happen now, like say Theo's birth mom called and said, I've had another child, I would like you to parent them, it would not be nearly as expensive, obviously. Or I guess if someone like down the street decided they wanted to make an adoption plan for their child, it'd look really different. But nope, ours was a lot more
Yeah.
than $4,500. But the Lord was really good and like provided with so many like generous people. And we were like really smart with our savings and stuff. So,
Mhm.
you know, it's worth every penny.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you do like fundraising or anything, or you were
We
able to?
did. We did some fundraising. I made some t-shirts. Again, like I said, my Instagram at the time was big into like the adoption world. So like I did my like catchphrase is "Hey party people." I like say it on
I
all
love
my
it.
stuff. So I have t-shirts that say like "Hey party people." Yeah, we mostly just did like the t-shirts, some fundraising. We got some grants that were amazing. We got partnered with a lot of great nonprofits in our community too.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
awesome.
sweet. Okay. Trying to make sure I cover all of my questions here. How do you feel like adoption has affected your marriage? Like, what kind of ways has your marriage evolved through the process?
So our marriage has been through a bit of a roller coaster. We laugh. We've been married for 7 years, but it feels like 17 because, like, in the process of, and not in a bad way, but like in the process of our marriage, we have had a parent a parent die. We went through the process of adoption, and we had three failed adoptions before we got to Theo. Then we are had a child born in the middle of a global pandemic. We lived in a different state. We lived in New Orleans for 3 months in the middle of COVID because Theo was in the NICU for that time. We've had like three job changes or losses. We've moved. I mean, just so much. So I think there has been some really amazing things that adoption did that taught us so much about who God is through that.
Hey guys, I just wanted to real quick take this moment to let you know about scripture journals that I've been writing. I will include the links in the show notes for them, but I love to study scripture one at a time and in depth. So I have included spaces to write it in different translations, and then at the bottom of each page there is a box for you to use the Strong's Concordance or maybe the Blue Letter Bible app to study the in-depth original meanings for the words in the scriptures. And then there are questions that I put a lot of thought into for the practical application of each scripture. So I hope that you are able to gain a better understanding of different scriptures and how to apply them and how to make them meaningful in your own life. And like I said, I'm including the links in the show notes, or you can search for my name on Amazon.
But I think I wish we'd been better prepared for the hardships that came along with adoption. And I say specifically for my husband, he'd probably say this too. My husband is a deep feeler. Like he is, I mean, the deepest feeler. And I'm very much the way, like, I feel my emotions, but then I'm like, okay, well, let's go on to the next thing. So that adoption fell through. We'll keep going. And he, I think, just had to like push through all the hard stuff. And then you come home with the baby, and it's like, oh, and my husband's father passed away when he was 5. And so there is a lot of, and I don't have, my mom passed away. So we've had a lot of like family, just like wounds that we've had to heal in the process. And so while I think it's made our marriage so much stronger because we've really felt like we've held each other together by like staples sometimes, I would have to be like, are you in the upside down right now? And he'd be like, yeah, I'm in the upside down. That's what we call it when we're just sad. So it's made us so much stronger, but it's also, I think, really opened up our eyes to things that we had not healed pre-adoption, that I think we're learning now that we're at a state that life has calmed down, that we're taking a really hard and deep look of like, okay, what do we really need to heal? Because, in life is at such a high speed pace, you can sometimes like look past the hard. And I think that's how it was for Theo's like first 2 to 3 years of life during the middle of COVID, moving. I started a new job, like all the stuff. Anyway, that was a really roundabout answer. I'm so sorry.
What we're doing here.
Yeah, it was so roundabout. It has made us like so much stronger as a couple because I like look at him, I'm like, we can get through that. We can get through anything.
Yeah.
But it also has, I think, opened our eyes up to, okay, these are things we really need to fix within ourselves as individuals.
Right.
And we've seen that take effect on our marriage at times where, like I said, we're going to marriage counseling because we've just figured out our communication skills are not awesome and we're missing each other. And especially, I mean, in parenting, you have a tiny, like little dictator, right? Like screaming at you, and their emotions are so big. And if you can't set your own emotions straight, you can't help them do the same. So it has made us so much more self-aware.
Yeah.
Is that a good answer?
Oh, absolutely. You don't really have a choice other than to become self-aware if you're going the right way.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. What advice would you give to someone who is just starting to consider pursuing adoption as everything feels daunting and overwhelming? Like, what kind of things would you tell someone?
I always say if you want to hear about the picture perfect adoption, like don't come to me because our story was not picture perfect. It was really like riddled with hardships. But being able to look at it at the other end, I'm like, people say to us all the time, this child was made for your family. Like Theo is exactly who God picked out for y'all. But that's really easy to say 4 years later down the line. I think, though, what I tell people truly is make sure that you're emotionally healthy and emotionally ready because you're stepping into someone else's mess. And your adoption story could be picture perfect. Like I have friends that, I mean, they came to me and asked me about, adoption. And I was like, okay, guys, like, listen, this is what happened to us. This could not happen to you. Legitimately, the first person they were matched with, it was like, match, we'll wait a few months. Baby came home. It was like, I was like, what?
Wait a second.
This is rude. Like, this is rude. So, like, yours could be the picture perfect adoption, but that is not what God promises us in life, right? Like, it's picture perfect. So, like, make sure that you are emotionally ready to handle your own mess when you come across some, hardships, but then also you're walking into someone else's biggest hardship of their life by making the decision to, whether through foster care where maybe they haven't made the decision on their own, or through private adoption where they have made the decision on their own. I mean, that's still the hardest day of their life, probably. And so be emotionally prepared that you're walking into that too. I always say, like, the day that was supposed to be, everyone says, like, is the best day of your life. For me, is so bittersweet because I remember like walking into the NICU and like staring down at this child and knowing, I'm so sorry, and knowing that his birth mom was like 10 doors away, because she had just given birth and was having the hardest day of her life, was so bittersweet. And I struggled with that a lot. And he like was born 2 days before Mother's Day. And so it was just, there's just so much. I call adoption our messy hallelujah, because it is so messy but so beautiful, and you just have to be equally prepared for the messy as you do for the beautiful.
Yeah, that's really good. And you're so right. Like that day, I remember when our daughter was born, and I don't know what it's like in Georgia, but in Alabama, they have 5 days to change their mind with no questions asked.
Hmm.
And I remember our caseworker, who is now one of my greatest
Oh,
friends,
I love that.
coming in and telling me, she said to tell you that this is the decision she's made, and she doesn't want you to miss any of these first moments or first
Mhm.
days of her life because you're afraid that she's going to change her mind. Like, the decision's made, and she wants you to just step into this and embrace it. And I was like, for her
Oh,
to have the grace to say these things, and like to be in that moment of embracing this human being that is tiny and needs me and all the things, and she's recovering from an emergency C-section in the other room, trying to make sure that I know that this is my child.
yeah. And I missed out on a lot of those moments because I was so fearful,
Yeah.
because we'd had it happen before, and we hadn't gotten to the point of the adoption where we had like met the child. We'd gotten to the point of like, hey, we're headed to the airport with the car seat in the back of our car, and we get the call to turn
Yeah.
around. But like I think I really, and it's so funny, like all of my adopted mom's friends, like you hold your breath so much, like until you get that, like, so for Louisiana, it's like you have to wait a week till after birth to sign the papers, but then once you sign, it's irrevocable. So you have a week essentially. So like you hold your breath for that like week, right? And then you hold your breath till you get ICPC, where you can leave the state and go back to your home state.
Oh, right.
And then you hold your breath until you have your court date, because for Louisiana it's a year. So like we waited a year from birth to have a court
Yeah.
date. And then I like held my breath to get his birth certificate, and that took another year because everything was so
Because of COVID.
delayed because of COVID. And then you have to hold your, so you're just like in a process of holding your breath. But I always say this, and I talk to, again, other adoptive moms, that I feel like I have such a loose grip though on my child now, in a way that I see a lot of my maybe moms that haven't walked through adoption struggle, because I'm like, you know what? He is God's, like he is not mine.
Yes.
And so I have this much looser grip on him, I feel like, and I don't lay up at night fearful about him, because I'm already like, we've walked through more. God has see us through more of this process. And he wasn't mine to begin with, because he wasn't. He
Right.
wasn't mine until honestly, probably he was a year old, right? Officially.
Right.
And he's not mine now. Like he's the Lord's. And so we just have to sit in that. And that's what it's helped me learn as a mom, is how to like sit and not hold so tight
Mm-hmm.
into that
Really
about
good.
who he is.
Yeah. That's really powerful. That was part of what we talked about last night too. We were just talking about like what an amazing testimony there's going to be. Like there's saying, I saw it on Facebook a few weeks ago, and it was somebody said, you can't pray away your child's testimony.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, we've our son who's struggling the most wants to be a pastor, and he's like
Oh,
writing sermons and doing things, and that's what we were talking about, is this isn't like, we don't get to determine the path for their life.
yeah.
Like, God already did it, and all of the ways that it's all worked out, like, just I feel like you said, like, it just kind of gives you this different hope of, this is not in my control, like, if this is the
Yeah.
grace of God.
And there's fear that comes along with that too. Sometimes of like, I don't know about you, I go to the doctor's office and they're like, does he have, tell me about his family history? And I'm like, don't know,
Yeah.
don't know. But then also, that also gives me a freedom, because I know my full family history, and it makes me anxious sometimes, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get diabetes and cancer, and I'm like, you know what? We're just going to live in this freedom that you are God's.
Yeah.
Me too, boo. And we're just going to roll
Mhm.
with that.
Yeah. I love that. I don't think I've ever thought about it in that perspective, but I really, really like that, because that's a
I
real
mean,
thing. Like,
you kind of have to, right? Like,
yeah, like, I don't
and
know
even
who.
And even the pieces you do know, you might sit there, because I know some pieces about a little bit about his history, like medical history and things that I'm like, you could stay up all night and think about, but I'm like, we can't do that. We can't live that, because
Yeah.
that's not what the Lord has called us to do.
Yeah. And it's just not honoring of the Lord
No,
to just ruminate on all of those things that could
things that
possibly
could
go
be,
wrong before
yes.
they even happen.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, how have you seen the Lord move through your adoption process? What have you learned to be true about him as you've kind of walked this?
Oh my goodness. I feel like I've just learned through the process of, honestly, my mom died, through the adoption process. Like, I feel like I've learned so much more about how to really trust him in the messy, because up until I think this process, I mean, my life was pretty good, normal. I didn't have anything that was like, oh man, that was like a real hardship that I had to like trust the Lord through. And then in the season of 2 years, not even, like, had to really like get ugly and down and dirty with the Lord and be like, I don't understand. Like, this is terrible. Like, I've done all the things you've asked me to do, and yet you still put us through trial after trial after trial. And it's really helped me to like know who the Lord is and know where my faith stands in the good and in the bad. And it can't change, or that's not real faith, right? I can't change my faith on days that are good versus days that are bad, because that's not the same. And it was funny because my son was learning about this in church when the manna came down from heaven, right? Just when they needed it.
Right.
And I have just learned how to like specifically pray for that manna when I need it, and asking God to show up in the times that I
Yeah.
need it. Like, I'll never forget my counselor, my most expensive best friend is what I called her, in the process of walking through my mom's death and then walking through the adoption. Like, I saw her very frequently, and I was telling her, like, I'm just really pissed off right now. Like, I am so mad. Like, I feel like I have been asking the Lord to show up, and like, I've been asking him for, you know, I've been asking him to give me anything, and he like gives me nothing, like not even a crumb. Like, and I want some steak, okay? Like, I need some steak. And I said, I need some flowers on my doorstep from him to show that he really cares about me, because I do not believe that he cares. And she was like, well, have you asked him specifically for that? And I was like, no, I shouldn't have to. He is God. She's like, maybe you ask specifically. And I don't think the Lord always operates in this way. Let me start with that. God does not always operate in this way where it's like you say the prayer happens. I don't believe that that's the way it works. He's not a wizard. But that day I was so broken, and I was like, okay, God, I need some steak. I need some flowers on my doorstep. I need something. And got back to my house, and there were flowers on my doorstep.
No way.
And they were had from my dad, and he was just like, and my dad is not really that kind of man. And so it was like, just thinking about you today. And I was like, so I have learned to look for God in the instances, and to ask him for what I really need, but also to be okay with how he gives me what I need might not be the way I expect it.
Mm-hmm.
Because honestly, my true way that I would have wanted him to give me flowers on my doorstep, right? Where to be like, oh, look, there's a baby. Like, I get out of my counseling office and I answer my phone, and they're like, you have a baby. That wasn't it. It wasn't that for another 6 months, but he showed me that he was like listening and heard me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I feel like I've learned through the adoption process, is to look for the ways that God loves you intimately and personally, and ask for those in times of hardship.
I love that. That's really, really good. Just like those
Thank
moments
you.
of sustenance.
Yes,
Mhm.
truly, like the manna. I would literally be like, today I just need some manna. And I would be like, and open my eyes to what that is. And whether that's like a friend just giving you a hug when you come into, the office, or something big. I mean, but help open to my eyes to what that manna is today.
I'm totally gonna start using that. I love it. That's really, really good. All right. Do you have anything else that you feel like we needed to cover? Anything else you wanted to share?
No, I mean, the only thing that I do want to share is, I think, things that adoption brought me, that I was talking about earlier is the community of adoptive moms.
Yeah.
And if you are not like in a place where you have that community, like it is so, I feel like has been so vital to my
Mhm.
parenting. So we moved after we brought Theo home. We moved back to my hometown to be closer to my dad. And I have friends here from high school because this is where I grew up, but I didn't really have anyone that could identify with like the adoption world. And this is so bizarre, but I'd had a long time before I was again super active on Instagram, connecting with adoptive moms on there. And a girl who I'd never met who lived in this, like my hometown had said, "Hey, you should come up. I'm part of this adoptive moms group. You should come up to this adoptive moms group sometime." But at the time, I lived like an hour away, and I was like, "No, that's too far." So, but I followed them on Instagram because the girl Rachel who runs it like loves the social media moment. And so I had just moved here, and I like get on my phone and I got on Instagram, and she had posted a picture of like two road signs, and it's like where Hope and Faith meet. And I was like, "Oh, that's crazy," because it's Hope Street and Faith Street. And I was like, "That's right down the street from my new house." And she was like, "Oh, we have an adopted moms meeting tonight. You should come." And so I went. And first of all, the girl that invited me had only come like one time. Like she was not even really like officially part of the group. But those moms that have in that group, one, I sit down, it was a girl that I like went to middle school with. And I was like, "Oh, hey, good to see you." And I'm a travel agent, and I was sharing with the group what I do. And Rachel, the girl who runs the group, was like, "I've literally been praying for an opportunity for something I can do while I'm at home. And I've asked the Lord for it to specifically be centered around travel. Like, is your company hiring?" And I was like, "They are." And so she's a travel agent now, like killing it, doing great.
Awesome.
But like our kids have gotten to connect, and they know now, Theo knows like 10 to 12 other kids that are adopted. And so it's not sorry, I've been trying to switch my language, that were adopted, not are adopted. Adoption is a
Right.
legal term. That were adopted. So like when life gets hard or tricky, or if we have hard questions, like I have this huge group of moms that I can text and be like, "Oh my gosh, what do you guys think?" And he has a group of kids that he can probably go to and be like, "I hate my mom. She, which he will one day, right? Like there's going to be times that they're not going to love us,
Right.
but they have this like community, and it's been the sweetest and greatest thing. So if you've not had a chance, go find yourself another adoptive mom to have coffee with,
Yes.
because
Hmm.
it changes the game of parenting.
Yeah.
And while all of our parenting and adoption stories are not the same, and while my friends that haven't adopted, I can still obviously talk with him about parenting because he's just a normal 4-year old. There's something so sweet about being able to, like, I know that to text Rachel around Mother's Day, because Mother's Day can be hard for her sometimes because of just adoption. And she knows to do the same thing for me and like check in. And
Yeah.
I don't think other people will understand that.
Absolutely. Mm.
So
Yeah.
find you an adopted mama friend.
Yes. That's been one of the biggest things for us since we moved here is that we didn't really have, we had an adoptive family that we were friends with, that we were pretty close with, but like it was just kind of just the one. And now it's like our entire church is full
Oh,
of
I love
adopted
that.
families. 3 of our pastoral staff have children that were adopted, and like we have an adoption ministry and all of these things
Oh,
that
yeah.
birthed out of it because of that like need for community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing. Everybody, I am going to post the links for where you can find Katie and learn all about amazing travel things, and see some adoption stuff and different things that Katie shares. I will put all of those in the show notes. And thanks for listening. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thanks for having me.